Okay, full disclosure, this is one of the worst things I've ever read in my life. Hi, I'm Pato, and I'm just getting out of a little reading slump that I was in for a bit, and I'm picking up steam. I think I've read 5 books in the last 2 weeks, so before I get too ahead of myself, I just wanted to stop and talk about some of the books that I've read before I forget what I thought about them. I think there's 12 total, so here are my thoughts on the last 12 books I read. Starting with It Came from the Closet, which is an essay collection about horror movies and queer identity. 25 different essays from different authors that take a movie and then relate it to their life in some way to varying degrees of success. I didn't really like this overall. I think that on paper it sounded like very much up my alley. It was not for me, I don't think. This is more suited to maybe like a 35-year-old, just because a lot of the movies that the essays are about I've never seen, I just have no relation to, they're not of my era. And so, aside from some of the more contemporary horror movies like Hereditary or Get Out and Us, I hadn't really seen many of these. And so, the weight of them being dissected kind of just washed over me. Then, also, the quality of writing was very inconsistent as well. There are some established authors like Carmen Maria Machado. I don't know, it just felt like I was reading things from like that belonged in different collections. Some of them felt more like blog posts, and some of them felt more like letterbox reviews, and some of them felt more like a textbook. It was just bizarre. Anyways, didn't really like this overall. I think maybe 3 of the essays I enjoyed, and 3 out of 25 is not exactly a passing grade, so it is what it is. I think I've already talked about this, but The Piano Teacher, finished this. I have yet to really formulate full thoughts on what I think about it, just because it's so unique and in like a bad way, I guess. Blends the line between being depraved and satirical, and just like teeters back and forth constantly, but doesn't really tell you when it's doing what. So there are some scenes that are ambiguous on whether it's meant to be taken seriously or not, because something terrible will happen, but then immediately a character will say some of the stupidest shit ever, and it's like, how am I meant to be feeling? I don't know. And that sense of limbo, that sort of like whiplash between emotions, happens constantly. I'm glad that I read this with somebody. I did a buddy read of it with Sean, and being forced to think of what to say about certain sections helped a lot, because reading this on my own, I definitely would have let some parts wash over me or like tried to ignore them, because I didn't really want to like digest what the hell I just read. Yeah, having to sort of formulate thoughts apparently did not do me any good, because I still don't know how I feel about the book. But I do know that I will not forget some of the shit that I read for a very long time. I also watched the movie. I think the book was better. I know a lot of people liked that movie. I am not one of them. After that, I read The Trial, and the reputation for this book and Kafka in general kind of precedes him. I went into this with very high hopes. Some were met, some were not. The beginning of this book is super ridiculous and over the top, and just like, I really enjoyed what I thought I was getting myself into. Then there's like a very big middle section that seems almost pointless and is meant to be, I guess, because like Kafkaesque sort of refers to things being semantic and pointless, getting in like a super long line without knowing where it goes, just for it to lead to like a locked door. That doesn't make for a very entertaining book though. And so the middle section of this book that sort of relies on these pointless events that are kind of stringed together by happenstance, I don't know. I was indifferent to some of it and also like entertained by other parts. Not all of it worked though. I actually considered DNFing the book, because I was like, I don't think I'm liking this. But the ending of this book is so good, and I think it's worth reading the sort of like ambiguous or like aimless middle section, just to have further context of this very overtly philosophical ending that explores this metaphor and these 2 characters sort of debating the ethics and the morality of what is happening and sort of law in general. Really thought-provoking, and it also just encapsulates what directly happens in the book. So some of those aimless sections get recolored in a way where now they make sense or like have this underlying message. Really enjoyed it. Again, it's kind of like book ended by good moments. The intro was really fun, and like the ending is super dense and thought-provoking. Yeah, I liked it overall. I also watched the movie version of this. Overall, very mixed opinions on it while reading, but on the other side, 2 thumbs up. Enjoyed it. I want to read more by him. Okay, sorry, it was super dark. Anyways, the next book I read was Braiding Sweetgrass, and I'm sorry in advance, I liked this book. and that's it. I've yet to hear any criticism from anyone who read this book, but I think that there's a pretty glaring flaw in the book. It's too damn long, and it's also way too repetitive in the second half. First half, I'm right there with y'all. Beautiful, holy, angelic text is so sincere and hopeful and pure and just radiates like this warm energy. And the central message of redefining the way that we engage with nature and also acknowledging the fact that we self-impose a lot of rules that don't need to be there. Beautiful. I'm on board. I cried so many times reading this, just reconnecting with certain ideas and blah blah blah. Then somewhere along the middle, I remember finishing one of the essays and being like, I feel like she said that before. And then I was like, anyways. Then the next essay was like more scientific and like empirical in the sense that I was like, this is kind of boring. That one finished, and then the next one wrapped up in a similar way again, and I was like, wait a minute, she's just repeating herself. And then once I was like looking out for her repeating herself, she does it a lot, like damn near the entire second half of the book is her just saying the same thing, or just like repackaging or like rephrasing the same sort of central message on a different example or like a different story, or just using like the same sort of platitudes that she did in the first. Yeah, anyways, my enjoyment dropped off severely, and then once I was being critical of it, I just kind of couldn't stop, and it really took a lot of the joy that I found initially out of it. I just think it was under-edited to the point where if the book was half as long, it'd be almost perfect. It'd be on par with Upstream, where I'm like, this is just a flawless book, and it's so pure and beautiful, and I love it, blah, blah. But it's not, and that's okay, but after seeing so much like non-stop praise of this book, I was pretty disappointed that I didn't, love it as unanimously, but it is what it is. I still liked it. It was a good book, but could have been better. Speaking of books that I liked but thought could have been better, Slow Days, Fast Company. I read this alongside the beautiful Benjamin Journal, and I mean, Eve Babbitt is Eve Babbitt, so she's going to be fun to read regardless. Larger than life, sort of auto-fictional memoirs that are elevated to the sense of like, she's exaggerating a little bit, but only to the sense that like, when you tell a story, you kind of embellish certain parts so that it is a more fun story. But at its core, it's still like a central truth. Going on dates, like short romances, and like her recounting certain parties or nightlife or etc. etc. This is still in the middle of her sort of living lavishly and being in like a constant bender essentially, and it kind of shows in her writing, where I've read Black Swans by her, really like that book. There's like a level of maturity and also like wistfulness, like nostalgia towards the events and like the sort of nightlife that can't be recreated, versus Slow Days Fast Company, where it feels very in the moment, where she's still too close to it to fully discern what happened or like what should be highlighted. And I just didn't super love it consistently. The last two stories make up half of the book, and I didn't really like either of them, which again sort of just soured the whole experience. But yeah, I mean, Eve Babbitt's what's not to love? She has such an infectious self-confidence and a very concrete sense of self-worth. Okay, the next book I read was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, and I've seen both ends of the spectrum where people either love this or hate this, and I'm pretty indifferent to it overall. I don't think I connected to this enough to dislike it. It felt very just consumable in like a trite kind of way, but it wasn't bad. For me, it's super comparable to like a Netflix show or just like a show of the week, like White Lotus, or a couple years ago like You or Beef, where it gets into the cultural zeitgeist, everyone eats it at the same time, and then a week later no one can say what it tasted like. Same thing, where it's like, oh, this subversive show that doesn't super say much. This book doesn't fully commit to the bit, but it's still kind of teetering on being subversive and being like in the mind of someone who's a freakazoid psychopath, where it's an author, they steal a book, sell it as their own, and then just commit further and further into the lie, and then struggle to keep up with all the loose ends. It's fun. Didn't really care either way. It's not written like amazingly, but it's not bad. Like you can't binge 10 episodes of a show in a day and be like, it was bad. Like, you just watched 10 episodes of it. It was okay to a certain extent. Same thing with a book. Sorry for all like the Netflix comparisons, but like they're one-to-one in my head. Like, this is like an airport book where you buy something for the flight, and as soon as you land, you can forget about it. It's read this in one ear, out the other. Didn't mind it. It was okay. Then after that, I read Abigail for another makeshift buddy read with Cami. It was better than I thought. It was slow goings for me. I think that's just because I was kind of slumping earlier in general, and so trying to read when I didn't really want to be reading didn't super line up. But liked the book overall. It just took me a while to get through it. I think I read this in like 3 sittings, basically. It's not a super short book. It's like 300 something pages, and I read like 100 at a time. It kept my attention super well. The pacing was really, really good, where every chapter ends with like a hook that just immediately makes you want to be like, okay, one more. In terms of like plot wise, it's super charming. It's about this girl who's at this boarding school with this backdrop of like World War II and like Nazi occupation looming in the background, and this sort of comparing of like innocence of like what she knows versus what she can't understand fully. And yeah, there's a lot of different aspects. There's like storylines with the teachers, storylines with her father who's like involved in the war efforts, and her own sort of life at this boarding school. Lovely, super charming, back and forth. Yeah, Sabo writes super well. All the characters are really fleshed out, and like there's this omniscience to the narration where so many things are like really funny, or like the motivations can change on a dime. Just super engaging storytelling overall. Don't really have anything negative to say about this. Abigail, pretty good. Okay, and Abigail was the book that sort of broke me out of the slump that I was in for like a week or two. So all the books from now on are like in the last week, so I have a more concrete sort of idea of them, which is why my thoughts are a bit more succinct. So yeah, less rambly, hopefully. The next book I read was We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. Did not like this book. It's like the grandfather of dystopian sci-fi books, where this was the direct influence of 1984, and 1984 went on to influence every dystopia ever. So reading this, the predecessor to the original like blueprint, just feels so distilled and like toned down and colorless. Pretty boring in comparison, unfortunately. I don't think it holds up on its own that well either. We're like, even taking away the surrounding context of like how many times the story template has been used in more like exaggerated and interesting settings and backdrops, there's 2 glaring red flags. One, I mean, male gaze in sci-fi is not like a surprise, but it is on full display here, where every single female character is sexualized, and then the main character is just this husk who like has 0 redeeming qualities, and they still throw themselves at him, and then that's like a central plot device of like the sex will liberate him into being a free thinker and he'll save the world. It's laughable. And then the second thing is that there's one single black character in this, and he's like an enemy of the main character, like love interest, love triangle thing going on. He's obsessed with taking his facial features and calling them disgusting. Then towards the end of the book, he like overtly compares him to a monkey at one point. It's really bizarre. I'm gonna be honest. Did not age well at all. So yeah, I wish I could have spent 200 something pages on a different book. Didn't really get anything out of this aside from like secondhand embarrassment. Okay, full disclosure, this is one of the worst things I've ever read in my life. Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke is a horror story collection meaning 3 stories, but it's more like one story. It takes up over half the book, and then there's 2 just kind of thrown in at the end, one of which is the worst thing I think I've maybe ever read. I'll go in order though. So the first story is fine. I'm nonplussed about. It's underwhelming, if anything. It's this epistolary sort of message log of emails and like forum shit where it's these 2 girls falling in love, and then one of them starts paying the other one to start doing these weird things out of love, and then the other girl will do them. And you just kind of read these emails that don't really have that much weight to them, where it's like, do this vile act if you love me, and then the other girl will just respond and be like, I did the thing, and I'm evil now too, and I love you. So there's a lot of gaps where it's like implied horror of like, oh, so she did that really weird thing that you asked her to? Okay, well, that's creepy. It escalates, obviously, but like even when they're recounting the events directly, it just kind of makes you squeamish. It's underwhelming. It's like a creepypasta, and then it ends very abruptly. Whatever. Story number 2 is the worst thing. I'm gonna spoil it. So if you want to read this, first of all, don't. But I'm gonna say what happens in story 2 of this. So if for some reason that bothers you, skip to that. Okay, so it has one of the worst like overt religious overtone like metaphor. I don't know what the. It's so bad. It's so bad, and like the pacing obviously doesn't help because it's a short story, so it's like there's no exposition. It's just characters saying directly what their motivation is or like what they think is happening, and like it's it's so on the nose that it's like it's painful. It starts with this kid who keeps like drawing circles on his palm and praying to a Jesus crucifix like 5 times a day. Then his dad gives him a hammer for his birthday, and you won't believe what the little rascal does. He crucifies himself with the hammer and dies from it. And it's actually really sad and tragic and horrifying. The parents were like gonna get divorced, but through the power of the crucifixion, they have regained their vows of matrimony and are now, with this refound faith, they set off like 6 months later on a riverboat expedition to a hotel in the middle of the ocean, and then they get stranded and have no more food. Oh, and then someone shows up on their doorstep in the middle of the ocean on the river in the hotel that they're staying at, Airbnb, pulls out a picture and is like, "You're my dad," and the dad renounces his child embroidered on a tote bag, and so the mom that you're like reading the story through the eyes of believes that this is an angel, a deity of God. And then they run out of food. The mom starts fucking the son. That's not supposed to happen under God's will. And she doesn't know who the father is because it might be the son of an angel or her son's son of a son of a gun. And so at this point there's like some weird like microaggressions going on in the household. The Airbnb is not as accommodating as it once was, and the son kills the cat at one point because he doesn't get food or something. I don't remember. I blocked a lot of this out already. I read this like 3 days ago. It was dog shit. I'm gonna be honest. I'm slowing down the pacing, but it was really bad. Okay, the son, after the son kills the baby. Okay. Oh, she puts rat poison in the wine to kill the angel. He like summons skeletons or something and goes under the ground. I don't remember. Anyways, it turns out it's not that interesting of a story to retell, but it was awful, and I read it, and so now y'all had to suffer through that too. Imagine if that was, I don't know how long the story was, 20 pages or some shit. Yeah, anyways, terrible book, awful. Okay, and then the last 3 books are ones that I am in the middle of, but almost done with 2 of them. So yeah, anyways, today, here's where I'm at book-wise. Lolita. I just started. I'm only like 40 pages in. Also, sorry to Sunny's for putting you in such an evil book. Really unsettling. I'm going into this completely blind, and I'm very scared every time I turn a page. Although it's already kind of changed tone a little bit and got funny. I don't know if funny is the right word, but I don't think it's taking itself seriously. Basically, as soon as the characters started like walking on all fours and eating fruits and like that experiment, I was like, oh, okay, like maybe I'm safe in this. Although I don't know what to hope for, like what I want to have happen in the book. So I'm scared of it. I'm gonna be honest. I'm also reading Woman Talking to try and cancel out that energy. Although I'm not really liking this. I don't know. I'm conflicted. I'm like 100 pages in and not super enjoying it. It's based on a true story. Objectively, I think the premise, if you want to call it a premise, is really interesting, where it's about the woman of this Mennonite town, which is like an Amish pilgrim-ass place, where basically the men of the town are using animal anesthetics and assaulting the women at night, and then they wake up and they can't remember anything, but they're covered in bruises, like there's signs of the attack, and eventually they find out what's going on, and they hold a town meeting of just the women to decide what they should do, whether they should run and go into the unknown, whether they should stay and fight, or whether they should just do nothing. It is really heavy and also like very much like a hypothetical book, even though it is something that has actually happened. So much of it takes place in like these sort of musings about the ethics and morals of like their decision, of how they're being treated, of what they should do, of like the pros and cons of every decision. Really interesting in like a objective sense, but the way it's written just isn't working for me. I think because so the scribe of the meetings, like the person who's like taking everything down, is one of the men of the town because the woman can't read or write. And he has like a love interest in one of the women and just keeps self-inserting over and over like how he feels and like how he keeps looking at her during the meeting and like whatever he's thinking, like fantasizing. And then he also just keeps going on like tangents and like backstories. Basically, I'm 100 pages in, which is like half the book, and the only person I know anything about is the dude, and I don't care, and it just keeps going into these passages about like him in jail and like him being a teacher, and it's like I do not give a fuck at all. And yeah, I just wish it would focus on the meetings themselves more, because like I said, interesting premise, but you just have to like wade through this muck of like this just dude for no reason, which seems ironic to me because like the book is about women being silenced and oppressed, and to read it you have to like go through this like male perspective, which must be ironic. Like that must be like this sort of like meta subplot probably maybe going on, but I don't know how it plays out in the movie. Maybe I would like the movie more, because at first I was like, oh, that's funny and like kind of ironic, but it just keeps doing it over and over, and the book is pretty short, and so if like 50 of the 200 pages are just like this dude's life story, it kind of stops being ironic at a certain point, just kind of grating. Yeah, hopefully I learn about any of the other women, but so far no luck. I'll try like audiobook, maybe it'll work. Like I don't know, maybe there's like a version of this that exists that I would like. I might just watch the movie instead, I don't know. And the last book is Butcher's Crossing by John Williams. Oh man, I mean it's no surprise that John Williams is amazing. Stoner was great. His Western is so good. I have like 40 pages left. Exercises in futility against nature and being like trapped in isolation, even being in a group, but like reverting and like retreating into yourself and being there for so long that when you come out and like face the world again, you don't recognize yourself. How, I don't know, you just leave parts of yourself in a place that you're trying to leave, and then at a certain point it's like, what are you even trying to come home to? I won't go into it. I won't go into like spoilers or anything, but yeah, just really, really great. It's set in like the late 1800s. It's about this group of people who go out to hunt buffalo and then just get more than they bargained for. And hey, editing Patu here. I finished the book and the ending changes everything, so nothing I talked about really applies. I'm gonna save my breath because definitely talking about this in like any list video that I make for like favorites of the year, it was so good. I just wrote a Goodreads review, so I'm just going to put that on screen. Sorry that it's kind of lazy, but it's like 1 a.m. It is what it is. It's so masculine. I'm sorry, women. This is like this plus Butcher's Crossing is like a Venn diagram of so many different things. I will definitely talk more about these when I finish them, but for now, that's what I am reading. That's what I have read. Thanks for watching.